let's go back to like 1776 because we didn't really have like reliable weather records then, right?
Not in terms of observations, but we did have things like paleoclimate records, which are things like tree rings, lake sediments. So there are different like proxy records, which are basically, the natural archives, the natural recorders of our climate. But we didn't have really reliable observations. And it's not that no one was observing or recording. In fact, it's been said over and over again, I'm not sure whether it's true or not, but it's said over and over again that on the day that the Declaration of Independence was signed, Thomas Jefferson went out and bought a thermometer. And that for the next 50 years, he recorded the temperature where he lived, and that he was a very avid, I guess you could say, a weather nerd, like that's our modern term. But yeah, he was very interested in weather. And so there were people who were recording, changes in our temperature, when they were recording, when it would rain, really. There was really crazy intense winters around that time, around the end of the Little Ice Age. So there's not the kind of same observational records that we have today. But there were records, they just were pretty sparse. And a lot of them were just documented by people and like diaries and ship diaries and stuff.
Okay, so can you give us an idea as to what weather and climate was like in 1776?
Yeah. So around that time, like I said, at the end of the Little Ice Age was this kind of period, this multi-century period where, especially around the North Atlantic and Europe and parts of the world, were more cooler than normal. So we were kind of coming out of this colder time. And in fact, they had some really, really harsh winters right about the time that the country was founded. In 1780, they had the hard winter, and it said that New York Harbor froze over from Manhattan to Staten Island.
Oh, wow.
And so it was considered, one of the coldest winters of the colonial period. And there were also, over the next at least maybe 10 or 20 years, there were, volcanic eruptions that also led to some cooling around the world. It's not quite in the 1700s, but in 1816 was when we had the year without a summer. That was I think it was Tambora's eruption that basically led to a year without a summer of cooling due to the volcanic ash that was up in the atmosphere. So it was definitely a cooler period, but it's not to say that it wasn't hot, because there's also recordings of battles happening. I think the Battle of Monmouth, one of the first battles that's in modern day New Jersey, it was recorded that it was 100 degrees that they were fighting it through. And they wore really kind of wool, wore a lot of wool and heavy cloth. So there are some records. I think it was said that there were a lot of soldiers that died from heat stroke instead of actually fighting. So there were, and that was in, middle of June, July. So not too surprising, but I think that there was definitely colder winters back then. Kind of, we see the occasional really cold winter, but this was something that was pretty common, and it was actually really dangerous. And a lot of people feared it. There were a lot of brutal winters in those earlier years of the U.S. So that's some of the things that we know from the early years. But yeah, I mean, we can also look back, and one of the reasons why we know what the temperature was and things like that is through those proxy records, those paleoclimate data. So ice cores and tree rings. That's actually one of my favorite things to do around town. I live in Sacramento, and sometimes they have to cut down trees. There's tons of trees here, but for one reason or another, and just looking at the tree rings and just counting back the years, it's one of my favorite things to do. So I really love paleoclimate records and those natural archives. I think it's just a really incredible thing that we have. And that's how we know, what the temperature was like millions of years ago.